telling you guys, this section, best seats in the house. What up, guys? Teachers also, if you can help your students go into the middle rows as well. We're gonna fill those up as well. Look at all this space. So also a few spaces up in the balcony. How's the balcony doing? What's up, guys? Guys, those coming in, fill up the middle rows.
Immigrant has somehow become a bad word. So the debate rages on and we continue.
Sit down, guys, sit down.
Black and white soldiers wonder alike if this really means freedom. Not yet.
I got one job, two job, three.
Still a bunch of space right here, guys.
I got 5 roommates in this one studio, but I never really see them. And we all came America trying to get a lap dance from Lady Freedom. But now Lady Liberty is acting like Hillary Banks with a prenup. Man, I was brave, sailing on graves. Don't think I didn't notice those tombstones disguised as waves. I'm no dummy. Here's something funny. You could be an immigrant without risking your lives or crossing these borders with thrifty supplies. All you gotta do is see the world with new eyes.
Immigrants, we get
Yo,
the
come
job
up front.
done.
Come up front. We don't bite.
Look how far I come. Look how far I come. Look how far I come.
We get the job done.
Look how far I come. Look how far I come.
Yo, we started in 5 minutes,
Far
guys.
I come.
Un minuto.
We get the job done.
It's a hard line
So
when you're
muted.
an import, baby boy. It's hard times when you ain't sent for it. Races feed the belly of the beast with they pitchforks. Rich chores done by the people that get ignored. Ya se armó, ya se despertaron. It's a whole awakening. La alarma ya sonó hace rato. Los que quieren buscan.
There we
Pero
go,
nos
yeah,
apodan
there we
como
go,
vagos.
guys.
We're the same ones hustling on every level. Ten los datos. Walk a mile in our shoes. Abróchense los zapatos. I've been scoping y'all
Front
dudes.
row.
Y'all ain't been working like I do. Why y'all work ya? It hurts ya. You claim I'm stealing
Okay,
jobs. So
balcony,
Peter Piper
yes.
claimed he picked them. He just underpaid Pablo, but there ain't
Bring
a
up.
paper trail when you living in the shadows. We America's ghost riders. The credits only borrowed. It's a matter of time before the checks all come. But
Immigrants, we get the job done.
Look how far I come. Look how far I come. Look how far I come.
The job done.
Look how far I come. Look how far I come. Look how far I come.
Starting in 2 minutes, so
We get the
please
job. Yeah.
sit down.
credits only borrowed. It's America's ghost riders. The credits only borrowed. It's America's ghost riders. America's ghost riders. America's ghost riders. The credits only borrowed. America's ghost riders. The credits only borrowed. It's America's ghost riders. The credits only borrowed. It's America's ghost riders. The credits only borrowed. It's
Immigrants, we get the job done.
AOA, immigrants, we don't like that. Nah, they don't play. British Empire strikes back. They're beating us like 808s and hi-hats at our own game of invasion. This ain't Iraq. Who these Fugees? What do they do for me but contribute new dreams, taxes and tool swagger and brutally? Cool, they flee war zones, but the problem ain't ours. Even if our bombs landed on them like the Mayflower. Buckingham Palace, a Capitol Hill. Blood of my ancestors had that all built. With an ink you print on your dollar bill. Oil you spill. Thin red line on the flag you hoist when you kill. But still we just say, look how far I come. Hindustan, Pakistan, to London. To a galaxy far from there.
We're starting in a minute.
Immigrants, we get the job done.
In your seats.
Por tierra o por agua, identidad falsa. Brincamos muros o flotamos en balsa. La peleamos como Sandino en Nicaragua. Somos como las plantas que crecen sin agua. Sin pasaporte americano, porque la mitad de Gringolandia es terreno mexicano. Hay que que ser bien hijo de puta. Nosotros les sembramos el árbol y ellos se comen la fruta. Somos los que cruzaron. Aquí vinimos a buscar el oro que nos robaron. Tenemos más trucos que la policía secreta. Metimos la casa completa en una maleta. Con un pico, una pala y un rastrillo. Te construimos un castillo. ¿Cómo es que dice el coro, cabrón?
Immigrants, we get the job done.
Look how far I come. Look how far I come. Look how far I come.
We get the job done.
Look how far I come. Look how far I come. Look how far I come.
Immigrants, we get the job done.
Look how far I come. Look how far I come. Look how far I come.
Immigrants, we get the job done. Not yet.
Hello. Welcome to the Latino Immigration Assembly. Please turn off electronic devices and refrain from using them. Now. Now we're gonna hear a poem recited by Diego and the rest of the students.
Mexican woman and Mexican man have a Mexican, American. Is the baby more Mexican or American? Place the baby in the arms of the mother. If the mother holds the baby too long, does the baby become illegal? The baby is a boy. He goes to school. His classmates are American. He is outcast. His hellos are in the wrong language. He takes the hyphen separating loneliness from friendship and jabs it at the culprit, himself, his own traitorous tongue, his name, his mom, his dad. Take a Mexican woman and a Mexican man. If they have a baby and the baby looks white enough to pass, if the baby grows up singing Selena songs to his reflection, if the baby hides from El Cucuy and La Migra, if the baby grows up to speak broken Spanish and perfect English, if the boy's nickname is Guerrito, if the boy attends college, if the boy only dates women of color, if the boy uses phrases like women of color, if the boy writes poems, if the boy grows up and can only write this story in English, does that make him more American or Mexican?
This presentation includes emotional and provocative content. Quotes read by students represent real people's views and stories and do not necessarily represent the views of the students reading them. Now we're going to do a stand-up activity. Stand up if you were born in a different country from the US and remain standing. Stand up if one of your or more of your parents were born in a different country. Remain standing. Stand up if one or more of your grandparents were born in a different country. Please remain standing. Now look around and see how many of us are immigrants or come from immigrant families. Thank you very much. You can sit down. Now we're going to have a personal story by Abraham.
Hi everyone, my name is Abraham Palma. I'm a freshman. I'm from Honduras and I arrived in September of last year. My family decided to come here for more opportunities for jobs, for my parents and for my education. Sometimes learning English is hard. I know that sometimes when new people come, other people are not always kind. But for me, people have been nice and have accepted me in their community. And I'm part of your community.
coming into the United States. What it is, it's an invasion.
Are we doing this? Okay.
When you know, the reality is this is not a caravan coming into the United States. What it is, it's an invasion. When you see that many individuals from another country massed together and they're going to enter a country by force with flags of the country that supposedly is oppressing them and that they're escaping from, there's nothing else you can call it but an invasion.
Okay. Since 2008, immigrants have left Central America in groups and made their way across Mexico towards the U.S., often on foot. They travel that way for safety and avoid the vulnerability of going alone. This year, a large group of mostly Hondurans have been arriving in recent days.
This land is your land. This land is my land. From California, well, to the New York Island. From the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, I tell you, this land was made for you and me. As I went walking.
For Latinos coming to the United States, it is ironic that we call them invaders. The United States has long intervened across Latin America, often in destructive ways. In 1979, the government of El Salvador was overthrown. A civil war emerged. President Jimmy Carter and later President Ronald Reagan both feared that the conflict could lead to the spread of communism in this region, something the U.S. has long opposed. Military leaders have been trained by the United States and carried out violent human rights abuses and war crimes against civilians. Between 1980 and 1992, the United States spent $1 to $2 million a day to support the Salvadoran military, which engaged in massacres, death squads, torture, and mass burials. By 1983, U.S. soldiers held top positions in the government and were making key decisions. Thousands of Salvadorans fled the country for safety across the U.S. border. El Salvador is the largest source of Central American migrants in the United States. Migration accelerated after the Civil War began. During the 20th century, the United States supported military conflicts across Latin America, indirectly or with occupying troops, dozens of times defending its economic and military dominance in the hemisphere. Frequently, that meant supporting dictatorships and death squads. These conflicts produce immigrants who sought refugee and economic security in the United States. They do not come to take over the United States. Mercedes Garcia came to the United States from El Salvador in 1990. Here's her story.
In 1990, I came to the United States from El Salvador. I was 25. The Civil War in my country had been going on for 10 years, and I was looking for a safe place to live with my son and husband. We were suffering a lot then because we had soldiers and the guerrillas fighting one another in our village, and we were caught in the middle. When I think about it now, I realize how blessed we were to have survived. Our houses were made of wood, so the bullets came right through our walls. When the fighting would start, we'd hide under the bed, but we didn't have big, thick mattresses to protect us. Under the bed wasn't a safe place, but it made us feel safe. The war started when I was 15. It was really hard because I always lived in fear. When the guerrillas came, the fighting was all around us. I remember the days the soldiers took my brother. He had just turned 15 and they needed soldiers for the army. When my mom found out that happened, she went straight to the army office. She knew that if she didn't get him out of that office quickly, he would be moved, and we would probably never see him again. She stayed there for hours crying and begging the soldiers to let my brother go. She gave them what little money we had, and they finally agreed to release him. That's when my dad decided to take my brother and flee to the United States. It was 1989, and I was studying accounting at the university, but things kept getting worse and worse. Bridges and power stations were being bombed, and we were without electricity and transportation for months. The sounds of the war were everywhere. I finally decided I had to join my dad and brother in the United States and find a safe place so that my son and husband could come. It took us a month to get here. We traveled by bus in the back of trucks and trailers. When we crossed into Guatemala, we were taken into a house that we thought was safe. But in the middle of the night, these guys with machine guns came and took everything we had. So without money, we couldn't get anything more than what our coyotes gave us, and that made the rest of the trip really hard. We finally got to Tijuana, where I crossed into the United States in the trunk of a car. From there, I was picked up and driven to Aspen to meet my dad and my brother. It was very strange to be in a place that was so peaceful after living in a country where warplanes, bombs, and rifle shots were part of daily life. Even though I was glad to be away from war, I missed my son and husband so bad. In those days, there were no phones, so I just wrote a lot of letters and cried a lot. I worked hard and started learning English and saving money so that I could later send money to my husband for the journey. 2 years later, he and my son were able to come. It took them 5 weeks to get here. It was wonderful for me, but it was really hard for my son. He has learning disabilities, and the war had really traumatized him. He was afraid of everything. It took him years to get over the trauma of the war.
When Mercedes' story is not uncommon, many immigrants arrive simply to find work or escape criminal gangs. They send back hard-earned money to families. Some immigrants do use welfare benefits, but at a lower rate than native-born Americans. The third generation may cost the welfare system, but by the third generation, immigrants return more than their grandparents used to in the system. However, the average benefit per immigrant is $3,718. The average benefit per native-born American is $6,081. And as we'll hear next, immigrants are more likely to create jobs. In fact, without them, our economy would be much worse off.
La rumba me está llamando. Bongo, dile que ya voy.
A long road that my poor hands have hold. My poor feet have traveled a long dusty road. At the edge of your cities you will see us, and then we come with the dust and we're gone with the wind. This land is your land and my land and your land. From California to the New York Islands. This land is my land and your land and my land and your land too. I can't believe it. And it's always we've rambled this river and I all along your green valleys. I will work till I die, and this land I'll defend with my life. It need be, for my pastures of plenty must always be free.
For For decades, Latinos have been crossing back and forth over the US-Mexican border to work in agriculture. In fact, beginning in the World War II, Mexicans were plastered with recruiting posters, trying to entice Mexican workers into the United States. Angel Guzman was born in a poor country in Tabasco, Mexico in 1924. He found a recruiter that got him work up north in the United States.
My parents were poor, and there were people even poorer during the time I grew up. We arrived at the contracting office, folks from the north, from Aguascalientes, from Zacatecas, from Hermosillo, from all over, to look for a way to leave as a bracero. We got contracted in Querétaro, and those that got contracted in Querétaro went straight to work on trains, track work. Those that got contracted in Irapuato, Guanajuato, went to agriculture. They didn't give us any choice in selecting the work. That is how I got to go to Philadelphia.
The argument that Latinos take American jobs is simply not true. Most Latinos take jobs that Americans don't want. Nowhere is that more true than in food production.
In 2011, 489,000 people in North Carolina were unemployed. The North Carolina Growers Association listed 6,500 available jobs. Just 268 of those 489,000 North Carolinians applied, and 245 were hired. On the first day of work, 163 showed up, and a grand total of 7 finished the season. Of the mostly Mexican workers who made it through to the end, 90% made it through.
The journalist and scholar Juan Gonzalez points out,
there's been a pattern now for the last 100 years of Mexicans being recruited in the country, then being shipped back out. Recruited into the country and being shipped back out of the country. The reality is that it's two countries and one economy. The Mexicans function as a reserve labor force in good times in America and as an expendable labor force in the bad times.
very few Americans work in farming. It's physically demanding and does not pay very well. This is what it looks like. In 2016, reports produced by 14 leading scholars of labor and migration, they found
high-skilled immigrants create jobs. Low-skilled immigrants fill empty jobs. Immigrants are integral to the nation's economic growth because immigrants bring new ideas and add to an American labor force that would be shrinking without them.
Here's another way to look at the role of Latinos in the economy.
The U.S. Latino gross domestic product, the value of all that is produced, represents $2.13 trillion, larger than the GDPs of Italy, Brazil, India, and Canada.
If U.S. Latinos were a country, they'd be the 7th largest economy in the world.
In the last decade, U.S. Latinos launched 86% of all new businesses in the U.S. There are 4.37 million Hispanic-owned businesses that combined contribute over $700 billion to the U.S. economy.
Here are some of the Latinos building the economy. Now we have Juan Carlos with his story.
I was a door gunner in a Chinook 47 in the U.S. Army. On October 13th, 2009, on a routine nighttime air mission in Afghanistan, an enemy rocket-propelled grenade hit my helicopter. As a result of my injuries, I lost my right leg below the knee. What led me to join the U.S. Army began when I was 9 years old, trying to cross the U.S.-Mexico border with my brother to reunite with my mom. She had left when I was 3 to make money so we could have a better life. The area I grew up in, Mexico, is like a third world country. I didn't even have a pair of shoes until I was 7 or 8. We could have waited years for a green card or take a risk and cross. My mom worked multiple jobs to pay for a coyote to get us across the border. At 12, I talked my mom into getting me a fake ID so I could start working after school and on weekends at a restaurant to make things easier for her. I got my green card when I was 15. At age 18, I enlisted in the U.S. Army after graduating high school. I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself and serve and do something I was proud of. I took my citizenship test while deployed in Bagram Airfield in May 2009, along with 200 others. I was finally a citizen. I was an American. I finally felt that this was my home. I'm attending college now. My goal is to become an occupational therapist and work with kids with disabilities.
They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. But I speak to border guards, and they tell us what we're getting. And it only makes common sense. It only makes common sense. They're sending us not the right people. It's coming from more than Mexico. It's coming from all over South and Latin.
So, what are the attitudes of Americans toward immigrants? According to the Pew-centered survey in 2015, half of Americans surveyed felt immigrants to the U.S. are making crime and the economy worse. But they are improving food, music, and the arts. Despite decades of political rhetoric linking undocumented immigrants with crime, most recently in the speeches and tweets of President Trump, the data tells a very different story. The blue line on this graph shows the increase in millions of undocumented immigrants living in the United States from 1990 to 2014, and compares it to the red line, which represents a decrease in millions of violent and property crimes in the United States within the same time frame. While the correlation does not mean that the immigrants caused there to be less crime, the American Immigration Council concluded that foreign-born individuals are less likely to engage in criminal activities than American-born individuals. In Texas, which has one of the highest Latino populations in the United States, undocumented immigrants commit less crime than native-born citizens, not more. And this is true in most metropolitan areas across the United States. In fact, where there's a large number of Latinos, there is a lower crime rate. At the same time, hate crimes against Latino immigrants are on the rise. For example, in California, hate crimes event increased 17.4% from 931 in 2016 to 1,193 in 2017. Anti-Hispanic or Latino bias events rose from 83% in 2016, or 83, to 126 in 2017, an increase of 51.8% Here's Rodolfo Rodriguez with his story.
My name is Rodolfo Rodriguez. I'm 92 years old and was in Los Angeles visiting my son's family. I was taking a walk on the 4th of July last summer when I accidentally bumped into a toddler whose mother attacked me with fists and a brick. While she was beating me, she screamed at me, "Go back to your country," and yelled to bystanders that I was trying to kidnap her child. I kept saying, "Why are you doing this to me?" When my son found me, he took me to the hospital where they found I had a broken cheekbone and broken ribs.
Stereotypes about Latinx immigrants and crimes are nothing new. For decades, popular media in the US have portrayed Latino characters as violent, lawless, and outside of mainstream society. Between 2014 and 2016, half of Latino immigrant characters in TV shows had committed a crime. These portrayals both shape and reflect popular US attitudes about immigrants.
There were all these things that my parents showed me and that I didn't get to see on television, which was dignity. Latinos with dignity.
You want me? 60 pesos.
A lot of unconscious racism exists because these type of images, these type of perceptions, these type of values have existed so long. They are the norm.
Sometimes the director says, "Wow, no, he's more street, you know? He's like, talks like this. He talks like this, man."
As the Trump administration and supporters make immigration from Latin America more difficult, there will likely be more immigration crimes committed by those who take a great risk to escape danger, then arrive only to avoid more danger in the hopes of achieving the American dream. The question is, does it make sense to criminalize dreaming of a better life? Here's Oswaldo Alanis with his story.
My name is Oswaldo Alanis. I was born in Mexico City, and when I was 3 years old, I was smuggled across the US-Mexico border. I didn't know it at the time, but this moment would change my life forever. That day, I became an illegal alien. My reality turned into living undocumented. We left our birth country without packing and without having the opportunity to say a proper goodbye. Great fear was present in our minds. People who come illegally make decisions based on morality rather than legality. My family, like many others, came to this country because it was necessary. The line between ethical and lawful is very fine, but it is even truer than the one that divides the two borders. On January 26th of 2019, my employment authorization card, alongside with my social security number, will expire. My future lies in the hands of people who feel I don't deserve to be here, but I won't allow those feelings to strip me of my hope, because this is my home, and I have dreams to fulfill. My dream is to become a financial advisor and create meaningful relationships where I can help others achieve their goals. I dream of making a difference and an impact on this world. I dream of equality in America and envision a stronger country where we manage to come together. My situation has helped me gain a deep connection and appreciation for my education and work. I'm only 20 years old, and I will be earning my bachelor's in business and administration with a concentration in finance this spring. I will have graduated in 3 years, earning myself a spot on the dean's list every step of the way. I currently work 3 jobs, and my average workday is between 12 and 16 hours. After work, I complete my school assignments because school is my priority. I'm involved in my community, and I have participated with organizations such as Habitat for Humanity, Boys to Men, and Junior Achievement. Every day for my family is an ongoing risk, but every night we go to sleep thankful that we are still here. I can say my greatest achievement is the unity that my family has brought me. They inspire me to set an example and make them proud. Today, my father is a successful carpet installer who does amazing work. My mother is a diligent factory employee who takes pride in her attention to detail. My brother is a leader amongst his peers and attends a prestigious math and science academy. Sadly, this country tells us that we are criminals, but survival is no crime.
Now we have Monica Vázquez with her story.
This is for my parents. At 22, they crossed the border into the U.S. and began their lives in a new country, uncertain of what the future would bring, but positive that this would be the best place to raise me. I never knew how much we struggled as a child, how my parents worked 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, until my mom could finally stay home and care for us, while my dad held down a stable job. After being granted DACA in 2012, I mirrored my parents' work ethic and began working full-time while taking classes full-time. And finally, at 22, I graduated nursing school. This is for everyone who tells me to go back to my country. For everyone who says I don't belong here. For everyone who says I'm taking someone else's job. For everyone who says I'm a rapist, murderer, criminal. You won't know my story, but I'll be at your bedside, taking care of you at your worst moment. And I think you'll be glad I'm still here.
Now we have Pat Buchanan, who has advised 3 presidents and has run for presidency 3 times. Here's what he has to say about non-European.
Any man or any woman of any color or creed can be a good American. We know that from our history. But when it comes to the ability to assimilate into a nation like the United States, all nationalities, creeds, and cultures are not equal. If you go to the end of the century, the white and European population in the world is down to about 3%. This is what I call the death of the West.
John Francis Kelly is a retired U.S. Marine Corps general and was responsible for military operations in South and Central America and the Caribbean, Secretary of Homeland Security in the Trump administration, currently Chief of Staff for President Trump. John Francis Kelly's ancestors were from Ireland and Italy. They were immigrants to the United States and settled in Boston. At an earlier time, Irish, Italians, and German immigrants were questioned. Could they assimilate and become Americans? Here's what John Kelly had to say about Latino immigrants just weeks ago.
The vast majority of the people that move illegally into the United States are not bad people. They are not criminals, but they're also not people that would easily assimilate into the United States. Into our modern society, in the countries they come from, 4th, 5th, 6th grade educations are kind of the norm. They don't speak English, they don't integrate well, they don't have skills.
John Kelly's ideas are not new in America. Consider what Ben Franklin said in 1751.
Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us, instead of our anglicifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can adopt our complexion?
After Irish immigrants began arriving in the 1840s, many Americans were repulsed by them, though they allowed them to do the brutal labor of digging canals. It was not uncommon to hear someone like James Buckingham say,
In Illinois, Irish ditch diggers were not merely ignorant and poor, which might be their misfortune, rather than their fault, but they are drunken, dirty, indolent, and riotous. The remedy is within their own reach to be clean, sober, and industrious.
On March 14, 1891, one of the worst mass lynchings in the U.S. occurred in downtown New Orleans. 11 men were hung or shot to death by a mob seeking justice for a murdered policeman. The victims were all Italian. A New York Times editorial wrote,
These sneaking and cowardly Sicilians, the descendants of bandits and assassins, who have transported to this country the lawless passions, the cutthroat practices, and the oath-bound societies of their native country, are to us a pest without mitigation. Our own rattlesnakes are as good citizens as they. Lynch law was the only course open to the people of New Orleans to stay the issue of a new license to the mafia to continue its bloody practices.
Europe's less desirable immigrants were eventually accepted as white. Not so with Mexicans in the Southwest. Scholar of Latino immigration, Juan Gonzalez, notes,
Since 1820, there has been no nation in the world that has sent more people to the United States than Mexico. And we're talking about legal immigration. More legal Mexican immigrants have come to this country than the Irish, the Germans, than the French, than any other population.
But it didn't begin with immigration. It began with conquest.
The reality is that great swaths of the United States in the West were originally part of Mexico. California, Nevada, parts of Utah, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado. That was the northern territory of Mexico, and there were Mexican citizens living on that land before it became a part of the U.S. As they say in South Texas, northern New Mexico, or southern Colorado, we didn't cross the border crossed us.
A year before the United States annexed nearly half of Mexico, the great American political figure Henry Clay asked about annexing Mexico in a manner reminiscent of Americans back east who questioned the arrival of Europe's poorer people. Here is Henry Clay.
Does any considerate man believe it possible that two such immense countries, with populations so incongruous, so different in race, in language, and in religion and laws, could be blended together in one harmonious mass and happily governed by one common authority?
What had been nearly half of Mexico was now the United States. Mexicans were to become Americans. The year of the Mexican-American War, 1848, was also the year that immigrants flocked to California for the gold rush. Pretty quickly, a hierarchy of race was established in California. Native Americans hunted. As many as 300 Mexicans and Mexican Americans were lynched in California in the years of the gold rush, and their lands were appropriated by white settlers. Like the Irish and Italians before them, they were considered perpetual foreigners. Even though Mexicans, now Mexican Americans or Hispanics, have been the majority in the Southwest, they had become perpetual foreigners. The die was cast for all Latinos who arrived to the United States, perpetual foreigners in their own land. In fact, the majority of Americans of the Mexican descent still live within the pre-1948 border of Mexico, perpetual foreigners in their own land. In the 1930s, during the Depression, more than 300,000 Mexican laborers and Mexican American citizens were deported from California, a million total from across the U.S. There are countless stories of families forced from their homes, like the story from Emma Gonzalez Martinez, whose family was deported during the Great Depression.
I think I was about 7 or 8, so it was about 1935 or 36. I witnessed police escorting Mexican families out of Longmont in a caravan. The police would stop occasionally and grab any Mexican-looking individual and throw them onto one of the trucks if they lacked identification. Later in life, when I recalled that incident, I realized the police weren't distinguishing between citizen and non-citizen. If you were a Mexican, you were gone.
In 1936, Colorado's Governor Edwin Johnson ordered all Mexicans to leave the state. That included anyone who looked Latino, perpetual foreigners. Immigration scholar Professor Maria Cristina Garcia connects Latino immigration to the history of European immigration.
Many Americans today believe that the new immigrants are too culturally different, that they're coming here to take American jobs or mooch off of welfare, that they have the wrong politics, that they don't want to learn English, that they don't want to assimilate, that they're national security threats.
Professor Garcia continues.
But these attitudes, they're not new. Americans have been saying this about every immigrant group through American history. In the 19th century, immigrants didn't learn English quickly enough. It oftentimes took several generations for English to become the dominant language. Our founding documents were all published in German to accommodate the German-speaking populations. For most of the 19th century, instruction in public schools across the country, from Pennsylvania to Texas to Wisconsin, occurred entirely in languages other than English. And this practice was not abolished until the first decades of the 20th century.
I am Ana Nunez. If ever asked, where are you from, my simple response is always American. I am American, born and raised in New York City, with Hispanic or Latino roots/blood, de sangre latina. My parents were both born and raised in a Caribbean country known as La República Dominicana, or the Dominican Republic. I am proud to say that it is an honor to be called or referred to as an American Latina.
I am Juan Caminero. We might live in a new land, but there is reason flags from the old one wave here. It is not political or rebellious. America is a land of struggle, victory, and the journey in between. For a young Latino, the journey means knowing where you come from and taking control of where you're going. It means living in a melting pot of cultures and still holding on to the traditions that were passed on by yours. That is what it means to be a Latino in America.
So how have we gotten to this point? After centuries of immigration and of dehumanizing immigrants, American interventions and support for wars of dictators and of death squads in Latin America all have propelled more migration. Raids and racism against those toiling in the fields, hitting in the backs of restaurants and the meat processing plants so we can all eat affordably. All of this has led our current immigration policy. It's hard to understand how any of this can explain what began in the spring of 2018, child separation.
They were picked up and initially taken to a cell, which detainees call the icebox.
Nos tomaron las huellas, después nos trajeron para allá, para la hielera, allí, y de ahí nos quedamos ahí esperando para ver qué hacían. Y ahí había mucho frío.
Within hours, they were separated. Jocelyn was sent to a Texas shelter. Her mother remained in Arizona.
¿Qué te explicaron? No me dijeron nada. Solo me dijeron que me iban a llevar para un albergue y que nunca jamás iba a volver a ver a mi mamá. Por ello yo no quería separar de mi mamá. Pero me separaron. Y yo me quedé llorando en esa hielera porque no la podía hablar.
For the very young, the experience is likely even more harrowing. Michelle Brane visited children in detention in June.
I observed young children being held in separate cells from their parents, pending processing. In some cases, they were extremely distraught. They had no idea what was going to happen to them. They had not been told.
Brane asked to interview some of the children.
We were given a list by the government, and we were told that we could choose who we wanted to speak to. Looking through the list of over 500 names, I noticed that there were some very young children there, including a 2-year-old, several 1-year-olds, and one child that was listed as being 0. So I asked to see those children. They left and came back and said that they couldn't find the children. They said to me, well, we called out their name and nobody responded, so we don't know where they are. So I sort of said, well,
these are babies.
They're babies. They're babies. Obviously, they're not going to respond to their name being called. Perhaps you need to locate the adult who is in charge of them, who's taking care of these babies. And they had no answer for me. They just shook their head and said, I don't know.
Growing outrage tonight as thousands of children are split from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border.
The battle over the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy on immigration is intensifying.
If the Statue of Liberty could cry, she would be crying today. As I stand here, there are 2,300 babies and kids who were ripped away from their parents by our government and are in detention facilities across America.
Outrage came from both the right and the left.
Many of the criticisms raised in recent days are not fair, not logical, and some are contrary to plain law.
On June 14, Attorney General Sessions responded to criticism by invoking Scripture.
Due to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government, because God has ordained the government for his purposes.
I
I'm not aware of the Attorney General's comments or what he would be referencing.
Later that day, Sarah Huckabee Sanders backed Sessions up.
Say that it is very biblical to enforce the law. That is actually repeated a number of times throughout the Bible. However, this hold on, Jim, if you'll let me finish. Again, I'm not going to comment on the attorney's specific comments that I haven't seen. That's not what I said, and please don't take my words out of context.
Come on, Sarah, you're a parent. Don't you have any empathy for what these people are going through? They have less than
Brian,
you do.
guys,
Sarah, come on,
settle down.
seriously. It's a serious question. These people have nothing. They come to the border with nothing, and you throw children in cages. You're a parent. You're a parent of young children. Don't you have any empathy for what they go through?
Jill, go ahead.
4 days after that, an audio tape was published by ProPublica. It led the news for days.
Tengo el número yo de memoria 34.
What we're trying to say is don't be a bystander, be an upstander. Demand that all people are treated with dignity. That's what makes you American. That's it. Thank you. That way. Wait, do we have time? Is this time? I think it's over. It's over, right? It's over. Thank you.
Go to class.
Have a good day. Thanks for coming.
GG in the chat.
Gracias. Buen día.